I'm welcoming Dr. Hussam Zomlot into the studio now, Palestinian ambassador to the UK. Hussam, you've been on the programme several times before in much happier circumstances, and we've always had a really interesting exchange of views, and you've taken calls from our listeners as well. Obviously, what everyone's going through at the moment, particularly in Gaza, is absolutely horrific. And let's start off by talking about this this airstrike today on the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. First of all, what can you tell us about that refugee camp, and just give your reaction to what's happened today? Because apparently, according to the health ministry there, at least 50 people were killed.
Well, I know a little bit about that camp because I was born in a refugee camp in Gaza, but to the south of Gaza. Jabalia is to the very north of Gaza. I have many family members in Jabalia refugee camp. It's the camp is an area of half square mile. On that half square mile, you have 50,000 refugees living. It's the most dense spot of land on earth, as per the UN statistics and what have you. The highest poverty, unemployment rates in the world. Those are refugees who were ethnically cleansed from their homes and lands in the Nakba events of 1948, and the ethnic cleansing that you all know about and been very well documented. And those very people were put under draconian siege for the last 16 years. And then comes today. Israel claims that there was a Hamas fighter somewhere in the camp and drops a bomb that is capable to destroy the entire camp. The scenes and the footages are horrific. And therefore, this is no longer a question of legality. It's really now about our very human values.
So when the IDF claims that Hamas's Ibrahim Biari, who's one of the leaders of the 7th of October attacks, has been killed along with several other Hamas members, you call that into question?
Well, it's not my job to call that in question. My job is to confirm that what Israel did is a war against humanity. You don't go and bombard a refugee camp, the most dense on earth. Children, women, families, destitute people, because you have information there is some suspect in that area. Those matters are not done in today's world, not by a state that is recognized by the world and has a seat in the United Nations. This is the most barbaric, unacceptable acts. And the question is, did Israel breach international law after the 7th of October? In every go. We have more than 8,000 civilians, innocent people killed by Israeli bombardments. We have more than 3,000 children. 3,000. You know, the 3,000 are the high. The total of Palestinian children killed since the 7th of October is more than the global number of children killed since 2019, and you had so many conflicts since then. You had Israel cutting water, electricity, medical supplies, fuel. You have babies in incubators that might die any second because the hospitals are running out of energy and generators. You have the spread of diseases now, including cholera, because people are drinking contaminated water. You have more than 1 million people that have been forced to flee and leave their homes without anywhere to go, without shelter, and yet still striking, bombarding them in the south. This is unconscionable, Ian, unconscionable. And the question here, if you allow me,
okay,
are all those breaches of international law? 100%. Did Israel breach international law before the 7th of October? 200%. The siege on Gaza is illegal. The military occupation and colonization is illegal. The settler violence is illegal. The apartheid regime that has been enforced on the Palestinian people is illegal. The killing of many Palestinian peaceful protesters in the West Bank is illegal. We have more than 110 of them in the last couple of weeks. The question has come not about Israel and Palestine. The question is about our international system, about this double standards and inability to enforce laws on Israel like anybody else? This is the key question. And the key question is why? For instance, why the UK, both government and opposition, is so out there, almost the exception. Almost everybody in the world is...
Well, because they were horrified by the events of the 7th of October, which you haven't mentioned yet.
Everybody was horrified. But weren't they horrified by the scenes in Jabalia camp today? Aren't they horrified? Aren't they horrified by the scenes from that hospital to Baptist? Aren't they horrified?
Which was...
Aren't they horrified?
That was a Islamic Jihad rocket that went off course.
Let's not get there. Let's not get there in the Israeli propaganda, please.
Well, it's not propaganda.
Okay, put that aside.
I've seen the videos. I've seen the proof.
Put that aside. Israel acknowledged that it did bombard the Jabalia refugee camp today.
Yes.
Why the UK government and opposition is not moved when they see, when they hear from UN officials, when Israel has killed 62 UN aid workers over the last couple of weeks. I mean, why aren't we moved by that? And look, this is very serious and dangerous, and I am really, really hurt as a Palestinian to follow some of the UK statements and positions. I mean, about ceasefire, for instance. They tell you, we cannot call for ceasefire because it will bring more violence. Hang on. More violence? This carnage?
I mean, to have a ceasefire, you have to have two sides willing to have one. The Israelis clearly have said that they're not willing to have one, and Hamas have said exactly the same. So, I mean, it's a domestic political row here, which is meaningless.
It is in such conflicts. That's why we established the post-World War II international order, because we don't leave things to the two conflicting parties, because there is something bigger that brings people together.
And if it's two countries that are fighting each other in some way, you can see a way forward. But here, that's not what we have. We have Israel as a country, and we have Hamas as internationally recognised terror group.
Yeah, and can we unpack that UK statement, both government and opposition?
Sure.
They say a ceasefire now will allow for more violence. What do they mean by that? More violence on the Israelis. That's the fear. What about violence on us, which is on steroids? Way more. You know what that tells you? It tells you some sort of racism, anti-Palestinian racism.
No,
yes.
No, it doesn't.
Ian,
because
let me ask you this question. Do you think these statements are really give the sense that Palestinian lives matter equally?
Well,
equally.
Yes, I do actually, because I think both political parties here, I mean, they're taking the same position, as you pointed out, that they say there should be humanitarian pauses. Now, frankly, I don't. This is semantics. I don't see that there is much of a difference between pauses and a ceasefire, because if you have a pause, clearly both sides are hopefully going to abide by that. So, I mean, we're dancing on the head of a pin here, talking about these definitions. But the reason that both political parties have taken the pro-Israeli position is because of what happened on the 7th of October. And however much people on one side of the argument might like to say, well, that wouldn't have happened without 70 years of repression. Okay, I can see the argument there. That in no way can justify what happened on the 7th of October. And as an ally of the United Kingdom, I don't think it's a great surprise that the United Kingdom government would condemn that in the way that it has.
I disagree. Rules are clear. Laws are clear. The moral guidance of law is what we need right now. And the international system always manages to enforce law when it comes to anything but Israel. Look at Ukraine. Look at Russia. Every single provision of law was enforced. And when it comes to us, the hypocrisy, the selectivity.
Do you genuinely believe that the UK government's position is racist on this?
I think some of the statements do not consider Palestinian lives to matter as much as Israeli lives.
Rishi Sunak has gone out of his way to say to Israel that you have to obey international law, far more than Keir Starmer has, actually.
I would stand as Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister and the head of opposition, and call for ceasefire immediately. When I see these children, when I hear from UN agencies that this is a mass industrial-scale murder, a humanitarian catastrophe like never before. Oxfam says this is unprecedented in its history, and it has personnel on the ground in Gaza. I would immediately call for ceasefire. And when I link the ceasefire to Israeli security, when I link the ceasefire when Palestinians are being killed by the hundreds and the thousands, mostly women and children, then I feel that our lives valueless then I really do feel...
Let me ask you
I
a
do
direct
feel,
question.
another argument, Ian, by the UK government, that in a situation of hostages, we cannot call for a ceasefire until hostages are released. This is not international law. International law actually is clear. Call for ceasefire so the two sides can negotiate hostage exchange and releases in a situation.
But Israel has already said it would do that.
And you see, if you justify mass murdering all these innocent people in Gaza as we speak because of hostages, Hamas or any other Palestinian group will come out and say, okay, we have thousands of Palestinian hostages in Israeli jail, including children, and therefore our violence is justified. You see where I'm going with this conversation?
I do, but I think you're ignoring the fact that Israel has already said that it would be, happy, but it would negotiate the release of Palestinian people in jail in Israel in exchange for the hostages.
Yeah, but that cannot be done when it's jet fighters are literally killing hundreds every day. That needs to...
Well, then this will go on forever, won't it?
We had conflicts before. That's why I refer back to the rules. By the way, this is a moment that I think it's the biggest stress test of our international system. You have senior UN officials resigning today. This is really a serious test. We always manage to apply rules when it comes to, the West friends like Ukraine, and apply rules against the West enemies like Russia or foes. But when it comes to friends, rules vanish. All what we need to do is just to apply the rules. Did Israel breach international law? The question was asked to the Prime Minister and to the head of opposition, the leader of opposition. And nobody said yes. I mean, what? What?
Well, because the reason surely is if you believe, as the Prime Minister and Keir Starmer both clearly do, that Israel is not breaching international law. The reason for that is they say that the strikes on Gaza are in self-defense and they're targeted to root out Hamas fighters and to kill them. That is the justification. So therefore, and if they're right, I would hope that Israel is trying to target as much as possible. But if you believe that this is all about punishment and killing as many Palestinians as possible, you're never going to accept that argument. I completely understand that.
No, don't hear it from me. Don't listen to me. Listen to the Israeli.
Well, I do listen to you because I think you're a sensible voice.
Please, take the Israeli voices and the Israeli official line very seriously. They are saying this is revenge, number one. And number two,
who has said that?
Everybody. I'll share with you whatever you want of lines. You would not believe the racism, the supremacy. You will not believe the genocidal discourse and genocidal rhetoric being used by Israel, all the way to the Prime Minister. When he quotes the Amaleks and the Torah, and not only it's revengeful and that, but you have Smotrich, who's the finance minister, who's the second most important man in the government, who has published a plan saying that Palestinians have three choices. Either they accept to live slaves under our rule, or they leave en masse outside, transfer, or they're killed. He published that. And now it's in steroids, this plan. They are planning it. They are pushing the Palestinians to a second Nakba out of our homeland. This is the first time in history that refugees are made refugees, twice and three times the same refugees. Come on, Dale. This isn't just about Israel's right to defend itself. What is there in terms of right to defend itself when you are deliberately dropping thousands of tons of bombs on the heads of families?
How does this end? Because Israel is not going to suddenly one day sort of wake up from this nightmare and say, oh yeah, we got this wrong, we'll have a ceasefire immediately, and we're happy to sit around a table with Hamas and talk about peace. That's not going to happen. So how does it end?
Equal application of rules. Number one, there are supremacist, racist, Kahanist elements in the Israeli government now. We don't. Hamas is not part of our government. We need the UK, number one, to designate these groups on the terrorist list. We need that equal application of rules.
So you think the British government is going to designate the Israeli government on the terrorist list?
Well, if the definition of terrorism is...
That's not going to happen.
Why, Dale?
It just
These
won't.
people... Ben Gvir is handing machine guns for the last so many weeks to settlers, illegal settlers, militias. They're forming militias. They are performing pogroms all over the West Bank, and they're killing civilians, our civilians everywhere. This is not terrorism? Why not? And he's doing it right, publicly, in front of everybody. Why do we fail to apply the same rules? And then we will raise our hands and accept these rules to be applied on them, on Hamas, on anybody. The problem with the UK and the West is the sheer double standards that has lasted for a long time. And you tell me about the UK. You know the historic responsibility, the moral responsibility of the UK, the Balfour Declaration, and the mandate of Britain that has denied us our right as a nation and our right as a state. As a nation, because in the Balfour Declaration, we were turned from the original native population that lived there for millennia into the non-Jewish population. So Britain has a role. And this is not to blame Britain. This is to say, this is the time. This is the time that Britain sets itself aside, not as part of the conflict,
but I come
back
to the question. How does it end?
Yes. Today, Keir Starmer gave such a contradictory remarks. The second part was absolutely commendable. He said, we must focus on the Palestinian inalienable rights. We must end the occupation. Settlements are illegal. The refugees must never be made refugees again. And he stressed the recognition of the state of Palestine and that a political solution is needed immediately. He pressed all the right buttons, but it contradicted his earlier message that Israel has the right to do what it's doing right now. It contradicted his commitment and the UK commitment to an international system that the UK helped establish.
He's not the Prime Minister, and you know very well, given what happened under the Corbyn leadership, that he's had 3 years to try and rid the Labour Party of its reputation for being anti-Semitic, and he's done quite a good job on that. So this is a very tricky position for him. But I have to come back to the question as to how does this end? How do you see it ending?
By really turning this most tragic moment in our history, this moment that will leave a dent in our conscience for generations to come, maybe for eternity, turning it into a positive moment. And we can. I think we can. Instead of talking about not ending Israel's violence, we should seriously consider now a bold move to bring everybody together to end Israel's occupation. This is about time. Israel cannot control an entire nation against our will. No one can underestimate the desire of a nation for freedom and liberation. And you know what? The last sentence. No one can underestimate the power of hopelessness on the other side. On the other side of the coin, we need to give people hope. This is the moment
But surely that is the responsibility of the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank, because at the moment they have no influence over Hamas as far as I can see. And yet I don't see any sign of a new generation of leaders coming forward to try and unite the Palestinian people, provide, sort of a Mandela figure, somebody who can really inspire people that there is a bright future, and someone that the international community and the Israelis can talk to. And at the moment, there is no sign of that happening.
You see, we always throw the ball into the victims.
Right.
Okay, the Palestinian leadership.
I will also say that Netanyahu must go as well. It won't happen while he's Prime Minister, but his political position is incredibly weak at the moment.
Can you really compare Netanyahu with the Palestinian leadership for the last 30 years? We have committed an iron way to the three things that were asked from us by the international community, by the US and the UK, and the rest of the international community. Number one, 30 years ago, recognize the state of Israel. We did until today. Number two, non-violence and negotiations. We did until today. Number three, recognize and uphold international resolutions. 67 two-state solution and all that. We did up until today. Israel was expected to do one thing during these 30 years, stop its colonial settlement expansion and roll back its occupation. You know what happened in these 30 years. And then the international community was supposed to do one thing. The US-led international community was supposed to enforce these agreements and to provide guarantees. It failed miserably to do so. So please, we have done all what we can to provide a different path 30 years ago. And that historic opportunity when Yasser Arafat shook the hands of Itzhak Rabin was never really taken seriously, neither by Israel nor by its backers, particularly the US. They thought they could push us more. They could take more land. They thought they could turn the occupation into permanent
Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't Yasser Arafat turn down an agreement where he had got 98% of what he wanted?
That's not accurate. And there is a lot of false propaganda going around, a lot of misinformation. Yasser Arafat went back to Palestine to achieve the end of Israel's occupation that began in 1967, to establish a state as per international resolutions with East Jerusalem as its capital, and to resolve the issue of refugees in accordance with international law. But what he was offered was a Mickey Mouse state. And please go read all US. A Mickey Mouse state. Jerusalem was out of reach, the old city. And you know how sensitive that is for us. And this is under international law, unoccupied city. And Israel must end its occupation of occupied Jerusalem. Therefore, we were never, ever offered something genuine. And I think any Palestinian leader would definitely accept an end of Israel's occupation on the 1967 borders. And any Palestinian leader would reject
but the
anything
problem
less
is,
than that.
The problem, you talk about any Palestinian leader, but we're talking about Hamas here, which, and I mean, actually just one other thing on this while I think of it. I suspect that given what's happening now is radicalising more people on the West Bank and is increasing the support for Hamas, which in the long term, from an Israeli point of view, has to be a bad thing. What signs are there that that is happening?
Well, we are at a fork, at a crossroad. And that's why our engagement with the government here and with the opposition and with all the political parties, the parliament and what have you, is that it's now or never that you create that different path. It's now that you do the detour. It's now that you insert blood in the body of a peace process. It's now that you give people hope.
Who's going to do that?
Yeah, no, that's the issue. That is the issue. Well, the Israeli society has been tilting to the right and the extreme right and the fanatical right and now the racist right and, you know, the Kahanist right. The situation there needs to change. We in Palestine have the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, that still commits to these principles the world seeks and endorses. So we may have an opportunity if after all this, a third party, that is the international community, comes and says to the two sides, you have to share that piece of land. And you have to share it in a way that is just. Everyone has to have equal rights. You cannot have security for yourself only. Also, the Palestinians deserve security.
I mean, that sounds like a one-state solution, where everybody lives together.
No. I think the international consensus remains to be a two-state solution. And the Palestinian majority...
But the Israeli government doesn't want that.
That's the only government that's the only government that rejects that. But if the Israeli government calls for a one-state where they will give all Palestinians absolute equal rights and citizens and to vote in the system and to decide on their own faith, we will discuss it. But the Israeli governments with an S, successively have been refusing a one-state solution, a two-state solution, any solution. All successive Israeli governments had one plan. Push as much as possible Palestinians out of their land and colonize as much as possible. This is the plan. It's simple. And use the time.
Well, that's what Hamas want to do.
Use the negotiations. You know, I don't see any Palestinian group occupying Israel or occupying Tel Aviv.
Well, I mean, it's in their constitution to obliterate the state of Israel and kill all Jews.
Who is obliterating who, for God's sake? Yeah. Who is obliterating?
No, but I'm just saying that it is a fact. It is a fact,
you know, that
it's in their constitution.
You know, that the Palestinians want to erase Israel, when in fact Israel is effectively erasing
No,
Palestine.
I don't say Palestinians want to do that. I say that Hamas wants to do that.
Well, I don't speak.
I know, I don't absolutely understand that.
You know that. But let's be real here, and let's be practical and accurate. I mean, it's Israel that has been, by words and by deeds, erasing Palestine, slowly sometimes, and on an industrial scale and in steroids like now. So who's erasing who? Let's not focus on the react. We must focus on the act that has lasted for 75 years. The sheer racism that comes out. The system of racial segregation that has been imposed. Go to the Amnesty International reports and see, to the Human Rights Watch, to the Israeli human rights like B'Tselem, to the numerous Palestinian human rights organizations. What is happening in Palestine for a long period of 75 years is simply humanly unacceptable, and it cannot continue. So then we all locate our moral compass on one snapshot, as the West has been doing, the media has been doing, the 7th of October. We should set a moral compass 75 years, actually not 75 years ago, 106 years ago. The Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate, and what happened since then. And then we have to zoom out, all of us, and really find a way to say that this is a conflict that is not very complicated, actually. It's not complicated.
We were supposed to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes. We're about to speak for 25 minutes, but the programme is about to come to an end. So let me just ask you one last question. Where do you see British public opinion on this? I mean, what levels of support have you had personally? I mean, I was watching you on Newsnight a couple of weeks ago, and you've lost members of your own family. It must be a very emotional time for you. But have you received a lot of support from the British public?
Yeah. Come to my office and see the flowers and the roses and the letters. My God, I have been flooded with love and support, and we in the mission. Let me take this opportunity to really send a message of gratitude to the British people everywhere. Look at the scenes in the streets last Saturday and every Saturday. I mean, hundreds of thousands, cross-community, Christians, Jews and Muslims, peacefully protesting.
We have to finish there. Thank you so much for coming in to see us. That's Dr. Hussam Zomlot, Palestinian ambassador to the UK.